Hello again everyone. Today we're going to take another look at the Dallas Scala amplifier project that I've been working on. I do apologise it's been so long since the last upload. I've had a lot of people asking me when I'm going to upload something more to do with the amplifier or indeed my guitar build project. The truth is, my personal and professional life, I've just been driving all over the country and I've had very little downtime, and any downtime time I have had, I've decided to use to try and get this room ready to turn into a recording studio, rather than spending any of that time on the hobbies that I'm so desperately wanting to progress with. So I do apologise about that, but as you can see, we're nearly done with this room and hopefully there should be a lot more videos on the way soon. So with that out of the way, let's have a quick recap on where we were up to. So I bought this amplifier at auction and it worked very briefly before slowly dying out. We determined that the main reason that it wasn't working was because there was a resistor in the power section which had effectively burnt out, which is never a good sign. But after replacing that resistor, recalibrating the amp, it seems to be working effectively as an amplifier. I was a little bit unclear, I think, in the last videos as to what valves and everything were in the amplifier, because this is my first project and I am just learning as I go. So just to clear that up, the preamp valve, it's a single preamp valve, which is an ECC83, or if you're in America, that's the same valve as a 12AX7. Which is a dual triode. You find them in just about every amplifier out there. It's by far the most common tube to find in an amplifier. The power tube is a ECC84. I forget the American designation for that. I think it's something like 6BQ something or other. But it's a single pentode is what it is. So as you already know, I kind of bolted all of the components to this rather dangerous looking breadboard, just so that I could peg everything out and work on it for the time being. Now, when I got the amplifier, by the way, I'll just stick a quick schematic on the screen right now for anyone who is into that kind of thing who can have a look. This is my interpretation of what the amp actually looked like once I got it and once I got it working. To anyone who's worked on these kind of amplifiers before, straight away they will see that it is a very standard single-ended basic amplifier with an output somewhere probably in the region of about 9 watts, something like that. The only thing that was a little bit odd, as I believe I've already said, rather than having a traditional master volume or a preamp gain control, the volume control seemed to be wired up right in the front of the amplifier as more of almost an impedance control for the input, which is not really right for a guitar amplifier. So that was the first thing I went about rectifying, and I decided to insert a standard volume control both just before the power valve, which gives you a traditional master volume, and I also decided to insert another volume control just before the second triode. Just in case anyone's unclear, the first preamp valve actually contains 2 triodes, so effectively 2 amplification stages. Normally you would have maybe 1 or 2 of these gain stages, and then you would control the volume going into the last triode to give you your preamp volume, otherwise known as gain. So I inserted those volume controls, and for all intensive purposes, it's working as an amplifier. I've got the preamp volume up full at the moment, and I've got the power or the master volume on probably only about a quarter. It's a very loud amplifier, but just to show you, I mean, it is making a sound. And it sounds nice. You know, it's got a nice quality to it. Just on the neck pickup there at the moment. sounds, you know, it sounds great. If I go to the back pickup, it'll probably sound a little bit brittle. Yeah, so great, we've got a sound out of it, but I noticed two problems. Let me show you the first one. As I've already said, I've got the preamp volume up full. With that in mind, that's kind of the equivalent of turning up the gain control on your amplifier. And even though I'm going into it on the bridge with a very hot pickup, well, a hot modern pickup, there just isn't really much distortion there, if any at all. Now, when I looked into this, it turns out that a single 12AX7 or ACC83 doesn't actually give you enough gain to cause clipping or distortion, as many people call it, on its own. If you look at any modern amplifiers really that are designed to give you any hint of a breakup or any kind of dirty sound, they will usually have at least 2, if not 3 preamp tubes. There are many amplifiers out there which have a single preamp tube in. I own one, for example, the Black Star HT5 would be a really common one. There's lots of other little amplifiers up there around the 5 watt or 1 watt range which have a single valve in them. But the truth is they're actually using solid state amplification in tandem with the valve to get that up to a high enough volume so that that single preamp valve will clip. Everything I have here is pure valve, so it's just not giving me enough gain to get that clipping that we generally like. So given that this amplifier is going to be pretty unoriginal by the time I've finished with it, I do want to try and get some extra gain in there just to at least get into that kind of bluesy, crunchy territory. I don't play high gain much anyway, but it would definitely be nice to have just a little bit of gain on tap in the amplifier. That's not to say that if I didn't stick a pedal in front of this amplifier and, you know, crank it up, that it wouldn't start to distort. It probably would, but I think we want to get at least a little bit of gain out of the amplifier. So we're going to have a little bit of a think about how we're going to do that. I'll save that until next time. But let me show you the other problem. Now, when I actually put this all together, I actually did the master volume first. I didn't have the preamp volume, so the preamp was just stuck up full the entire time. Where's that bloody pick gone? So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, when I originally started trying to apply the volume controls to this, I actually put the master volume in first. Now that means that the preamp was effectively on full volume the entire time, which, you know, is fair enough. The master volume in theory would actually be all you would need on this amplifier, considering there's no gain or clipping to really control. What I did find though was when I had the master volume fairly low, nice sort of indoor volume, it sounded fine. But if I turned the master volume up, which I'm actually just going to do on the guitar here because it's already actually quite loud, it started to clip. Which, you know, is great, but I don't know how well it's coming out on the mic there, which by the way is just a single SM57, but it's quite brittle. Which, you know, could be an effect that you're going for, and it might be what you want, but it's not that pleasing to me. So what I thought originally actually was that it might just be that the speaker in there is actually designed more to be a transparent hi-fi speaker than a guitar speaker. generally you find the clipping sounds that come out of amplifiers are really harsh and brittle like we're hearing, but the guitar speaker actually softens that. So I thought this might not actually be a guitar speaker inside this amplifier, and that's why it sounds so harsh. So the next thing I actually did was try hooking it up to a guitar cabinet. So I'm just going to do that now, and I'll show you what a difference it makes. Okay, so we're back. As you can probably tell, I've swapped out the original speaker cabinet with my Marshall 1960 cabinet. That is loaded with Celestion Vintage 30s and wired in stereo. That means to match the 8 ohms impedance of the original speaker, I'm having to use one side of the cabinet rather than all 4 speakers. I've left the amplifier on exactly the same settings, and again I'm just controlling the volume with the volume control on the guitar. You can already hear that there's a little bit of hum, but if I just turn up the volume on the guitar, just checking the levels there. Switch back to the neck pickup, I think it sounds a little bit smoother. Sounds perfectly acceptable to me. Even on single coil, if I get a bit kind of snappy with it. Sounds great. Definitely has all the character you'd want from a valve amplifier on a clean setting. Now, I will say the first time I tested this, I was only using single coils on my Stratocaster. And I thought when I plugged into this cabinet, the distortion had completely disappeared because I could go quite loud. I've just got this coil tapped onto a single coil setting at the moment. That's, you know, pretty loud, louder than I would really want to use at home normally anyway. And it's still perfectly clean. However, because I've now got humbuckers, even though I've lost my pick again, because I've now got humbuckers, there is some distortion there, and it sounds really nice actually. Now I think I'm right in saying I had the preamp as loud as it would go. Let's turn the master down a bit. Do we still get that distortion? Yeah, I mean that's probably a bit quiet. Let's try. I mean, it sounds like most valve amplifiers. I think you've got to get it up to a certain volume before it sounds good, but there is distortion there. But you have to remember, I mean, I'm on the hottest pickup that I've got there, and it's on full gain. Now, that's not really usable, I don't think. There's no real point in having that control, or at least having both controls, if all you're going to get is the slightest little bit of gain. So we still need to push that a little bit further. But, you know, it just shows that that amp can make a nice sound. And I think it is a lot better when connected to the 12-inch speaker. So I think we're going to do away with the 6x9 speaker in that original cabinet. and try and wedge a proper 12-inch guitar speaker in there. But let me just show you one other problem that I found. If I set my guitar to quite a bassy kind of sound, right, this is an E chord, A minor chord I should say. Plenty of low end in there, but watch what happens when I turn the preamp volume down. Still quite bassy? Let's go down further. I don't know if it's coming out on the video, but the bottom end is kind of disappearing. I'm just going to try and strum it and turn it up so that you can hear it. Do you hear the bottom end come in there just as I hit a certain volume? Let me do that again. And suddenly at that volume the bass comes in. It comes back. Now, yes, there is a tendency to perceive bass and high frequencies and things more when they're at a high. There is a tendency to perceive bass and high frequencies more when they're at a higher volume. That's why on old hi-fi systems you used to get a loudness button that would boost the bass and the treble when you're playing at a low volume, just to compensate for that. But there's actually something a little bit more happening with this amplifier. If we go back to the schematic and we take a look at the first triode in the preamp stage, if anyone's not too familiar, all that basically happens here is the guitar signal coming in on the grid on the left hand side there actually will regulate the flow of the current from the bottom to the top of the valve, or from the cathode to the anode I should say. So that is effectively how amplification is achieved. When the louder signal comes out of the anode of the valve, you effectively have a big DC stream of current with the amplified guitar signal riding on top of that. The way that we kind of get the guitar signal back and get rid of the large DC signal is allowing the signal to pass through a capacitor. Only AC signal can flow through a capacitor. So this little, what's known as the coupling capacitor at the top here, that allows the AC guitar signal to flow on to the next amplification stage, while all of the high voltage DC current disappears off up round the circuit. That's all good and well, but as is often the case with analog components, all of these components actually have an effect on the analog signal, or more specifically the sound that we're ultimately going to hear. Capacitors are actually used to filter frequencies. They have an inherent cut-off frequency, so they will actually behave like a high-pass filter. So they will cut bass frequencies and allow high frequencies passed at a certain threshold. This coupling capacitor, what we need to realise is immediately after this coupling capacitor we've inserted a volume control that wasn't previously there, which is effectively a potentiometer, and all it's doing is varying the amount of resistance between the signal path after the capacitor to ground. When it does that, the easier the signal can flow to ground, if you like, then the quieter the volume is, because more of the signal escapes to ground and a smaller amount of signal actually goes on to the next valve. What these coupling capacitors can also do though is act as a filter. If we look at how to actually make a high pass filter, it consists of a capacitor with a variable or fixed resistor fixed between the signal path after the capacitor and ground. And this is exactly what our volume control is. So what we've done is, by inserting a volume control, we've also created a high pass filter. Now, we would need a resistor in here anyway. Even if there wasn't a volume control, there would still have to be a high value resistor in here to allow current to flow. But if you actually do the math, you'll see that the more resistance there is between the capacitor and ground, the lower the cutoff frequency will be. So when the preamp is on full volume, it will be allowing the maximum amount or the maximum range of frequencies through. But as you start to turn that volume control down that we've introduced, that frequency will start to creep up. Now, I haven't got the figures in front of me at the moment, but I think I'm right in saying that when you're getting down towards the lower volumes for this amplifier, it was starting to roll off frequencies quite severely. They might have chosen that value by design, because traditionally back in the 50s and 60s guitars were quite trebly, jangly. They didn't want much low end, they just wanted pure, clear, sparkly highs. But obviously today that's no good to us. Typical values you would find for this capacitor are usually more in the region of something like 10 or 20 nanofarads, compared to the 1000 picofarads we have here, which I think is 1 nanofarad. So what I would definitely like to do is introduce a higher value capacitor at this point. That should stop that bass roll off from happening. So I've got some capacitors on order for to do that, but they're not here at the moment. Otherwise I would have liked to have shown you that already. The next thing we need to have a think about really is, what are we actually going to do to get a little bit more gain out of the amplifier? We could experiment with things like negative feedback and various other techniques, or we could just throw caution to the wind and try and introduce another gain stage entirely. Now, this amplifier, I had hoped originally when I bought it that I could have maybe kept it as a collector's piece. But given that the tremolo and everything is missing from it, and I'm going to have to recover it because it's in quite a state, I don't think it's ever going to be anywhere near original. So I've decided just to make it an amplifier that's functional for me. If it's going to be an amplifier that's functional for me, it's going to have probably an effects loop, potentially a line out as well for recording purposes, or at least that would be very nice. So I think it's almost unavoidable that we're going to have to introduce some extra components. We're going to need some gain type components, some amplification in order to run an effects loop anyway. So I think what I'm actually going to try and do is introduce a second preamp valve, at least one, which would give us that extra gain that we need just to push the amp harder, and would also give us something to power an effects loop. So that's the plan. Some of the components are still on order in order to be able to do that, but that's what we'll be taking a look at in the next video. Until then, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you do have any questions, by all means leave them below. If anyone is waiting on some more videos from the shed, they are coming. I do apologise, like I say, but more on that soon. Until next time, goodbye.